bred as mindless creatures to fight a war that was never theirs. The tortured creatures, originally known simply as pigmen, would be stranded in a faraway world, left by those who had created them to a lonely and painful demise. Only they did not succumb to their new home, rather thriving in a way even those native to this foreign reality could not. Though it would take an immeasurable amount of time, those once sent to destroy a place they did not understand would eventually come to dominate it as its new masters. Gods had begun. Humanity had all players deep and challenging, different is less likely to get me horribly Far back in an age forgotten to all but the most ancient of elemental beings, a great war had ravaged the overworld, a war started by those who it would inevitably extinguish. In an attempt to expand their reach, the overworlders had invaded the Nether, as if it was their own, only to be driven back and brought to the brink of extermination by the Blaze Legions. With a dwindling fighting force and despair in their hearts, they would abandon their morals in favour of blind desperation, and conduct horrifying genetic experiments until they were able to create a creature suited to their needs. An expendable soldier they could send to fight and die without consequence. It is unknown whether the overworlders had realised the truth, however, whether they were completely ignorant to the pigmen's fledgling sapience, or if they merely chose to disregard it for the convenience of their cause, an ethical quandary they no longer cared for. And so it was these barely living abominations, the muscle rotting from their bones, that would be equipped as soldiers and packed into storage bays until it was their time to be deployed into the Nether. When that time came, they would swarm from the portals, a wave of replaceable flesh that would break upon the force waiting for them. Untold numbers would fall on each side, but despite the unending stream of warriors, the line would be shattered by the Nether's own fearsome abomination, the Wither, and the portals would be permanently closed, stranding countless pigmen in a hostile existence they had no chance to survive. Even so, against all the odds facing them, they did. Without commands from the other side, the naturally placid pigmen ceased their attacks upon the Nether fortresses, and without a remaining force substantial enough, the natives of the Nether chose not to press the apparent advantage, instead following an unspoken truce with these interlopers, for it had been recognised that these tragic beings were not but slaves to the ones who commanded them. Given the freedom to think for themselves, the spark of intelligence within the pigmen quickly grew, allowing them to organise into groups, seek out sustenance in this alien place, and make a home for themselves. Over the millennia, the pigmen's intellect only continued to grow, but it was now that their frail bodies limited them. They had only ever been meant as glass cannons, and any strenuous activity like building or mining resulted in limbs being torn off and spines shattering. For now, their intelligence would become a curse, as they were sentenced to live imprisoned within bodies that could not achieve what they desired. While the Nether had been static for an eon, with the remaining weavers continually trying and failing to create a paradise for themselves, change would eventually come. As if overnight, a wave of bizarre and tainted life washed across the Nether, and from the living ground, strange forests would sprout, changing the face of everything the pigmen had ever known. The weavers had seemingly accomplished what it was that they had sought since the moment they were born, but this explosion of life had not stopped at just changing the Nether, for the pigmen too started to change. Wounds that they had been created with began to heal. Lesions they had possessed for thousands of years finally closed, and after all of this time, the pigmen were whole. But it was not without its limitations, for it was found, rather harrowingly, that stepping through a Nether portal would undo their transformation, returning them to the feeble zombie-like pigmen they had once been. Whether they liked it or not, they were now tied inextricably with the Nether as one of its own creatures, unable to exist in the overworld, just like the weavers before them. Regardless, they saw the potential this miraculous healing had provided them, and chose to throw off the final shackles of their long-distant oppression, dubbing themselves Piglins. Quickly, their people went from roaming nomads to a fledgling civilization, capable of creating their own culture, building their own towns, and even creating a lesser form of life from their own genetics that they could farm for meat. Life within the Nether was still difficult though, and the Piglins knew it would take time to raise a civilization, so sought alternatives in the meantime. Once the weavers had occupied great fortresses, impenetrable bastions that did not even fall during the Great Wars, but now it would appear that something had happened. For ages, the Piglins, in their rotten form, had avoided these structures, fearful of what dwelt inside, but now it seemed that they laid empty and ruined, not at the hands of some enemy, but through the death of the living Nether brick that had constructed them, now nothing more than inert stone. Not to pass up an opportunity like this, the Piglins took ownership of these crumbling structures, at least until they had communities of their own. But it was apparent that the Weaver's gift of life had not come without a cost. Whatever spell they had cast to create the overworld-like forests they so coveted had siphoned life from the greater living being that was the Nether. Even while the Piglins began to flourish, the world that they would inherit was dying. Maybe they could survive through this great change, becoming the next stage in an ever and eternally evolving reality. Or maybe the Weavers had doomed them all to a slow, cold end. Hi everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked what you saw, then please consider liking the video, subscribing and sharing it with your friends. If you want to support the channel even more, then head over to Patreon, become a channel member or buy some merch. Links are all down in the description. I hope you all have a great day and I'll see you next time.